Hi, I'm Tim, and this is Heather, and we're here to introduce you to the Antibody MAPS module. Heather's going to be helping with some of the technical aspects of putting this video together.
Hello, I'm happy to help.
All right, the Antibody MAPS module. As you probably already know from looking at the MAPS website, we already have 3 modules up on the website that you could choose as your MAPS modeling project. Those other 3 modules are focused on either aquaporin, the water channel that transports water in and out of our cells, hemoglobin, the protein which transports oxygen around our body, and then the third current module is insulin, the peptide hormone that regulates our blood sugar. So we're about to add this 4th module focused on antibodies. So the first question we probably should talk about is, why have we chosen antibodies? And I have at least 3 reasons that we've done this. First of all, an antibody, which here's a large sort of articulated model. See how flexible that is? This is a model of an antibody protein, and it's just interesting. And one of the things that's always fascinated me about this particular protein is its modular nature. And what you're going to see here in later videos is that an antibody is nothing more than 12 of these little protein domains, which we're going to call an immunoglobulin domain. So you're going to be learning a lot about this, and you won't be able to see much from this. This is just a larger scale model of this immunoglobulin domain, and how once nature discovered or evolved, it didn't discover it, this domain evolved over time. And it evolved to be a very stable protein domain that proved to be very, very useful in the immune system that humans have and other eukaryotes. So the second reason antibodies are interesting is that they play a really important role in our immune system. Some people refer to antibodies as the soldiers of our immune system. So these proteins bind to other proteins, which we call antigens. So right here at the 2 tips, these 2 tips of an antibody, this 3-lobed structure, these 2 ends right here constitute an antigen binding domain. And they can recognize and bind to specific proteins. And in most cases, they inactivate the proteins that they bind to. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So people have devised many ingenious ways to use antibodies to treat human disease over the last few years. So there's now a field called cancer immunotherapy. People are using antibodies to target specific proteins that drive cancer cell proliferation. So this is a really exciting new application of antibodies to the treatment of cancer. Some of you may be familiar with autoimmune diseases, and those diseases are simply a dysregulation of the antibodies that make up our immune system. And a final example of why antibodies are important is that these are really useful tools in the laboratory. You can put fluorescent labels on an antibody that recognizes a particular cellular protein, and then you can make a thin section through a cell, and you can stain that thin section with a fluorescent antibody for your protein of interest. And then you can look at that through a fluorescent microscope, and you can see where your protein is distributed throughout the cell. Is it a nuclear protein? Is it in the endoplasmic reticulum? Is it on the surface? So these are really, really useful proteins to a molecular biologist these days. You may also have heard about coronavirus tests, which are antigen-based tests. So anytime you hear the word antigen, you should be thinking antibody, because antibodies bind antigens right here. So it's another reason that you might want to be interested in antibodies. And then the third reason is also related to coronavirus, because we're all interested in vaccines right now. We're waiting for those vaccines that are going to protect us from coronavirus. Here's a model of coronavirus, a cutaway model, so you can see the yellow RNA genome. These proteins on the surface represent the spike protein. And these spike proteins play a very important role in the infection process. And the vaccines that you're hearing about, the mRNA vaccines that Moderna and Pfizer have developed, encode for a protein that is just a fragment of this spike protein. So our immune systems will respond to the piece of the spike protein that is encoded by the mRNA vaccine. And your immune cells will produce an antibody that will bind to that receptor binding domain on a spike protein. So this antibody here is a physical model of this antibody here at very different scales. But wouldn't it be nice if you could explain to your parents how that vaccine is working? It's just stimulating the production of these antibody proteins that are going to coat this virus with antibodies and inactivate all of these spike proteins so that they can't initiate that infection process. So there are 3 reasons that you might be interested in learning something more about the antibody protein.